Welcome back to State of the Union. I'm Jake Tapper. Republicans are venting. They're claiming betrayal after Democrats denounced a major climate and tax deal hours after securing bipartisan passage of a bill to boost U.S. semiconductor production. But now Republicans have set up their own controversy, sparking outrage among veterans groups after they stalled a bill that would help those sickened by exposure to burn pits while in Iraq and Afghanistan. Joining us now to give the Republicans' perspective on all of this is Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania. Senator, I want to get to the PACT Act about veterans in a second, but first, you just heard Senator Manchin argue that Republicans should be supporting his climate and tax bill because it would reduce inflation, boost energy production here at home, lower gas prices, increase revenue by closing a loophole, and help pay down the debt. I'm guessing you don't see it that way, but what's your response?
Well, Jake, thanks for having me. Look, I like Joe Manchin very much. He and I have become friends over the years that we've served together in the Senate. But it really looks to me like Joe Manchin's been taken to the cleaners. Look, this bill, the corporate tax increase, is going to slow down growth, probably exacerbate a recession that we're probably already in. The prescription drug price controls are going to slow down the development of the next wave of life-saving and life-enhancing medicines. They're going to take this money and spend it on corporate welfare for green energy, subsidizing wealthy people buying Teslas, and in a blatant political bailout, the Obamacare subsidies that they said they'd let expire this year are going to be continued for high-income Americans. All of this adds up to doing nothing for our deficits. It's going to do nothing for climate change. And what does Joe get for this? He gets the promise that someday in the future, they'll pass some kind of legislation about energy infrastructure. If they were serious about doing this, they'd put it in this bill. It's not going in this bill because they don't have Democrat votes for it. And by the way, we haven't seen any text. We don't even know what it looks like. So this is a disaster. This is going to make our recession worse. It's going to make inflation worse. It's not going to do any good. I'm really surprised that Joe agreed to this.
So you just said a lot. Let me do these one at a time.
Yeah.
So first of all, when you talk about corporate tax increase, what this bill would do was that if there is a company that has $1 billion or more in profit, it would require that corporation, that company, spend at least 15% of its profits in taxes. Now, to the average American who pays more than 15%, they might think that doesn't really sound like raising corporate taxes. That sounds like the way Senator Manchin described it, closing a loophole. Why are they wrong?
So let me say why this is devastating, especially to American manufacturers, especially to the coal industry, why Joint Tax Committee says half of this burden is going to be carried by the manufacturing sector. So here's what happens. If a company makes $1 billion, the income, that $1 billion, is calculated using our tax laws. And then they pay 21% on that. Now, what we did in the 2017 tax reform, which helped spur so much economic growth and investment, is we said if you take your profits and you invest them back in your company, if you buy more equipment, if you buy more machinery, if you build a new plant, if you do the kind of things that allow you to grow and hire more workers, then we'll allow you to treat that as the expense that it is in the year in which you incurred the expense, rather than take that expense in little bits over many years. So someone with that $1 billion in which they reinvest all of it, that doesn't count as income for that year. Now, according to the financial standard, the financial accounting, financial books, which is what Joe and this deal would rely on, they don't allow you to expense that investment you've made in your business. They only allow you to take a small sliver of that as a deduction in the year in which you incurred it. And so you'll have to pay 15% on that investment. Guess what? That makes that investment in American manufacturing much more expensive. It means there will be less of it. We made this change, Jake, very consciously, predicting, correctly as it turned out, that it would accelerate the investment in American manufacturing. The Democrats are going to blow that up.
So you said that this isn't going to do anything for climate change, but at its heart, this bill would be the single biggest investment to combat the climate crisis in U.S. history. It's $369 billion in new tax credits, investments in clean energy manufacturing, efforts to curtail emissions. We are seeing the results of the climate crisis all over the globe, a crisis the Republican Party has been denying the existence of for decades. Climate experts say this bill would have a real impact. Why don't you agree with that?
No, well, not the IPCC, not the definitive source that folks use for the climate modeling. And Jake, it's not true that Republicans are denying that the climate is changing. The fact is, all of these gestures are not going to have an impact. Look at the IPCC's own climate model. According to them, if the United States of America went to zero carbon emission tomorrow, which is, from a carbon emission point of view, equivalent to America disappearing tomorrow, if that happened, then in 2100, at the end of this century, the surface temperature of the planet would be 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than it would otherwise be.
Yeah.
Given that kind of scale, what is having a few more rich people buying Teslas going to do? It's going to do nothing. What we need is a strong economy and the ability to find the innovation and the technology that will allow us on a massive commercial scale to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. But these gestures, they may feel good, they're not going to accomplish anything.
I think it's more than just allowing some rich people to buy Teslas, but I do have this important issue that I know you want to talk about, which is Republicans, led by you, this week blocked the bill expanding health care access for veterans who have been exposed to toxic burn pits. There are veterans currently, right now, camped out on the Capitol steps, not to mention veterans all over the country, including ones I'm sure you've been hearing from in Pennsylvania, upset about this. And this delay has a real impact. I want you to take a listen to this from Danielle Robinson this morning. Her husband, Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson, who the bill is named after, he died from lung cancer attributed to burn pit exposure. Here she is this morning talking about how the cost of how long this is taking to get done.
We know a veteran who actually took his life because of the delay. He was denied from the VA and he lost his private health insurance. He would qualify under this new bill. Once he learned about the delay, he actually did take his own life because he wanted to spare his family of losing their home.
Now, to be clear, she's talking about a previous delay, not the one you caused last week. But what do you say to those who find it impossible to believe that of all the multi-trillions of dollars in our federal budget, this is where you and Republicans decided to take a stand?
Here's what you need to keep in mind, Jake. First of all, this is the oldest trick in Washington. People take a sympathetic group of Americans, and it could be children with an illness, it could be victims of crime, it could be veterans who've been exposed to toxic chemicals, craft a bill to address their problems, and then sneak in something completely unrelated that they know could never pass on its own, and dare Republicans to do anything about it because they know they'll unleash their allies in the media and maybe a pseudo-celebrity to make up false accusations to try to get us to just swallow what shouldn't be there. That's what's happening here, Jake.
But this,
my efforts,
this was
my
in
Republican
the bill,
colleagues.
This was in the bill that passed the Senate last month.
Yeah, and we were promised that we'd have an opportunity to offer an amendment to change this, and then, of course, that was reneged on, so people hadn't had a chance to be socialized about this. Let me be very clear. Republicans are not opposed to any of the substance of the PACT Act. My honest Democratic colleagues will fully acknowledge that my objection, and if I get my way, I get my change, it will not change by 1 penny any spending on any veterans program. What I'm trying to do is change a government accounting methodology that is designed to allow our Democratic colleagues to go on an unrelated $400 billion spending spree that has nothing to do with veterans and that won't be in the veterans space. So that's what I'm trying to do. They could have agreed to this a month ago and this bill would sail through at any point in time. Look, we can resolve this with an amendment vote.
Right.
But some of the Democrats don't even want to have an amendment vote.
Well, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says that he is willing to give you a vote on your amendment. And I guess the question I have is, if you get that vote, a vote on your amendment, will you agree to vote for cloture, which for our viewers, that's allowing the bill to come to the floor? In other words, we don't expect Senator Toomey will vote for this bill, but will you vote to allow a vote on the bill?
Oh, well, first of all, let's be clear. If my amendment passes and we strip out this completely unrelated provision worth $400 billion, I will vote for the bill. So that's number one. Look, cloture is not blocking the bill. What the cloture vote means, there can be no more amendment votes. I might have some colleagues who have a couple of amendments. We've been allowed no amendment votes on the biggest change to the VA in I don't know how long. So I think we ought to have a few votes. I want to have my amendment considered because I think this is important. We could have done this a month ago, Jake. Now, Chairman Tester, I know he very much wants this bill to pass. I believe he and his staff are working in good faith with us to get to a resolution. But there's some Democrats that simply want to say, no, you don't get to change anything. We don't have any more debate. We don't have amendments. We're just going to jam this through. So that's the source of the tension.
Okay, but it's not enough for you to get a vote on your amendment. You want your Republican colleagues to get votes on their amendments also, is what,
well, look,
is what I'm
it's
hearing.
it's not only up to me, Jake. I mean, I do think anybody who has an amendment ought to be able to get their amendment. That probably means 2 or 3 amendment votes. We could bang that out tomorrow night, literally, and then pass the bill with probably 85 votes.
So the top,
we'll see if our Democratic colleagues want to actually pass the bill.
The top Republican on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas, he says he thinks Republicans should pass this now and fix any problems that emerge later.
Yeah, except there's never an opportunity to fix the problems later. That's why they're not giving us the opportunity now. They know they can prevent us from fixing it later.
So one of the questions that I think people have about what you're claiming is a budgetary gimmick is the VA budgets will always remain subject to congressional oversight. They can't just spend this money any way they want. And from how I read this legislation, it says that this money has to be spent on health care for veterans who suffered exposure from toxic burn pits.
This is why they do this sort of thing, Jake, because it gets very deep in the weeds and very confusing for people very quickly. It's not really about veteran spending. It's about what category of government bookkeeping they put the veteran spending in. My change, the honest people acknowledge, it will have no effect on the amount of money or the circumstances under which the money for veterans is being spent. But what I want to do is treat it for government accounting purposes the way we've always treated it for government accounting purposes, because if we change it to the way that the Democrats want, it creates room in future budgets for $400 billion of totally unrelated extraneous spending on other matters. That's what I want to prevent. We are spending way too much money to hide behind a veterans bill. The opportunity to go on an unrelated $400 billion spending spree is wrong, and we shouldn't allow it.
All right, Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Here with me now to offer